Hello everyone, you're listening to You Got It with Warrior Woman 91. Alright, so we've got a lot to talk about today. There's a lot in the news. I've got a really creaky chair, so I apologize for the little bit of noise in the background. I've got two cats completely sound asleep, so at least you won't hear them crying in the background. So, this episode is being recorded the Monday after the attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up, even though my last couple of episodes have not been very political and I haven't been really delving into politics too much. I've been doing my best to avoid it, actually. By the way, if you guys did enjoy the last episode that I recorded with Bailey of Bailey Lynn Fitness, please let me know in the comments. I got a lot of good feedback already, and it was actually one of the more popular episodes based on how many views I got right out of the gate. So let me know if you guys like that kind of a show as opposed to political discussions on a show. Obviously, the politics will never actually go away because that's kind of what I'm most known for, but I do really want to break into these other topics of discussion that are, quite frankly, more interesting to me and mean more to me in the long run than the political discussions, which are just kind of the day-to-day angst of what everybody's talking about on Twitter. But speaking of what everybody is talking about on Twitter, so these attacks happened the day before this episode was recorded, and there were many Democrats that came out to offer their condolences on the day after, or on the day of these attacks. So basically, to break it down, they're saying that it was an act of Muslim extremism, that over 200 Christians were killed on Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka, and 500 plus were injured. So let's see. Barack Obama was one of the political celebrities, shall we say, that decided to offer his condolences on this attack on Sunday, and he tweeted out. Let's see if I can find it. He tweeted out a tweet of condolences that just was a little odd, and he wasn't the only one to do this. His tweet said, quote, "The attacks on tourists and Easter worshippers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity, on a day devoted to love, redemption, and renewal. We pray for the victims and stand with the people of Sri Lanka." So that all sounds well and good, and everybody who offers their condolences usually uses this kind of language, except this term Easter worshippers. What the heck is an Easter worshipper? I didn't know that people worshipped Easter. Easter isn't a thing that you worship. It's the name of a holiday. It's just kind of weird. It's like Christmas worshiper. Do we worship Christmas? Do we worship Easter? Do we worship, I don't know, 4th of July? It's just weird. But basically, my evaluation of this is that the term Easter worshippers is a way of kind of couching the narrative so that you don't actually realize, oh, these were Christians that were attacked. Because the narrative and the idea that Christians are a persecuted group doesn't fit with the narrative that the left would prefer to be pushing. So that's kind of a problematic thing that Obama was trying to avoid there by using the term Easter worshippers instead of Christians. But Obama wasn't the only one to tweet with this kind of language, because Hillary Clinton also tweeted a similarly odd tweet. Let's see, I'm going to try and pull it up right now. But this term Easter worshippers just seems to have come up among Fox News used the term. But let's see. So Hillary Clinton tweeted, "On this holy weekend for many faiths, we must stand united against hatred and violence. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attacks on Easter worshippers and travelers in Sri Lanka." Yeah, so there's that term Easter worshippers. I don't know. Here's the thing that I find strange. How many people that aren't Christians are celebrating Easter? And not only that, how many people who aren't Christians are worshiping on the holiday of Easter? Because of course there's plenty of non-Christians that celebrate Easter. They celebrate the bunnies and the eggs and the candy and all of that. That's celebrating Easter, but this is very specific worshiping on Easter. That's very specific to Christianity. Not even Jews worship or celebrate Easter. Like, they're the only ones who would even come close because they're at least referencing the same God as Christians. But Christians are the only ones that celebrate Easter. That worship on Easter, I should say. That worship in relation to the Easter holiday. It's just kind of weird to me that we can't just call them Christians. But of course, again, it has to do with the narrative. We can't have the narrative be damaged, so this is damage control. And we've got to get the narrative back on the track because there's nothing more important than the narrative. The narrative is everything. And you can see that in at least 6 other Democrat tweets. Let's see. Julian Castro, on the day of redemption and hope, the evil of these attacks on Easter worshippers. And then we have Representative Dan Kildee, such a horrific terror attack on, quote, Easter worshippers. Ami Bera, MD, also a verified account. I am deeply saddened over the horrific acts of violence against Easter worshippers. Jared Paulus, Greg Stanton, Mayor Brian Bowman, all verified accounts using the term Easter worshippers. Now this leads me to think that perhaps there is a DNC handout or email that is sent out in times of strife or attack or tragedy that says, here are terms that we suggest that you use. That's just a little conspiracy theory of mine, but I'm just saying. It just seems like something that makes sense to me. Why else would people be using the same term over and over and over again? It just seems, it's just a little convenient and a little coincidental, and I don't believe in coincidences of that nature. So that's my whole deal. And now I've gotten so much flack in my mentions for being perturbed by this, which I feel like I have a little bit of a right to be perturbed as someone who identifies as a Christian. I think I have a little bit of standing to be able to criticize somebody who's commenting on a Christian activity like Easter. I might, Easter is kind of, you can't celebrate Easter. I shouldn't say you can't, because there are many people who do. But Easter is not like Christmas. You can't participate in and celebrate it and completely ignore the story, although people try. If you actually, you can't make sense of Easter without the Christian story. Otherwise, it's just it's bunnies and candy and, what's the point? Why would we have a holiday about bunnies and candy? That's called Halloween, you guys. Why would we have a double here? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, but my problem here, and this is what everybody's complaining to me about. Everybody's like, well, why are you making such an issue? It's just semantics. It kind of matters when in all other instances, like when there are attacks against Muslims, for example, there's great outrage and uproar, and there is standing with Muslims and not all Muslims and this and that, and this is very important. And of course, I'm not advocating for attacks on Muslims. I'm, of course, condemning on all fronts violence like that of any kind. But I'm doing that across the board, and I'm saying Muslims should not be attacked for no reason. Christians also should not be attacked for no reason. But I say the words, I say Muslim, I say Christian, I can say these things. I'm not afraid of these words. I don't have to couch them with Easter worshiper or Ramadan celebrator or whatever it is. I say the words. Why would I feel the need to couch it or use other language? And you can just use some examples of Hillary Clinton. Matt Walsh actually pointed this out. Hillary Clinton, there was an attack on an LGBT community, and she says in her tweet, to the LGBT community, please know that you have millions of allies across our country. I am one of them. Straight from Hillary Clinton herself, according to the tweet. This is very personalized language and very forceful language. But the previous comments on these other ones are these foreign alien Easter worshippers. It makes it sound like it's a pagan religion of like sun worshippers, and these people they go out and they do these chants around the fire and in this tribalistic manner. It's almost as if it's a term so that people can other Christianity, because we wouldn't want to say it. We wouldn't want to say the name because that legitimizes it. You got to use some other term because it's not legitimate. Anyway, those are my thoughts. All the people yelling at me in my mentions, I really, really enjoyed that all morning. It was very distracting while I was jogging because I was trying to look at my phone while jogging. So I did a very slow 1.5 miles thanks to you guys. I really appreciate that. So there's quite a few other things to discuss in addition to these attacks. I didn't want to just focus solely on that. One of the things that I did, let me see, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I believe, I went to the Holocaust Museum, and I really wanted to talk about it on this show, because, first of all, it's one of my favorite historical time periods, because there are so many crucial things that happened that I think people don't like to think about and would prefer to forget. And I think it's very, very important to remember these things. It is, quite frankly, it's very concerning to me, especially in light of the whole idea that we need to tear down statues, or that we need to burn books, or we should censor this or that. It's very disturbing to me when anybody advocates that kind of thing. And so that's why I think it's very important to have things like Holocaust museums, and there should be museums for every kind of historical tragedy that has occurred in history. I just think that it's important that those things are not forgotten, that they are remembered. And anytime you want to tear down a statue or burn a book or censor material, it makes me think that, okay, so we're going to now pretend like that didn't happen so that we can potentially have it happen again. So that's why I'm a huge advocate. I also, it's one of the only organizations that I recommend donating to, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. So I did go to the Holocaust Museum, and I walked through, this is the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum. It's actually the second Holocaust Museum I've ever been to. The first one was the DC one, which is, I've heard from people who have gone to the ones all over the world that the DC one is actually the best one to go to. However, the LA one is just, it's good too. Like, I mean, DC is the one to go to if you want it really, like, in your face. This is what happened. LA is like a historical documents, and they do have, like, there's one document that was an actual newspaper. I believe it was not a newspaper posting, but it was one of the notices that was put out for the Japanese to be interned, announcing where they needed to go and by what time and date. And it was just really, as somebody who has lived in LA, it is very shocking to read those notices, having lived in the area and knowing the streets, like knowing where those streets are, having just literally driven on those streets, and to see those streets listed in the notice, so that Japanese are to be interned from such and such street to this and this street here, and you must all meet up at that street there. And it's like, it was a real thing. Like, this wasn't just a story that somebody made up to tell you when you were in school. This was a real thing. It's just one of those things that just kind of drives it home, the reality of the situation and the concern that I continue to have that this could happen again. It's something that you need to think about. It it's it is one of my gravest concerns that people are so uninformed and they don't realize what things have happened in history, and they think that things are just fantasies that were told to them when they were children, and now, oh, we know better now because we're the new generation and this could never happen because we're modern, and tyranny doesn't happen in the modern days. And no, it's a real thing. I actually have a picture. I took a picture of that notice on my phone. The it's just kind of staggering. One of the other things that I found really fascinating, also in that in the Holocaust Museum, was the Schloss Hartium, and I'm not fluent or even remotely aware of how to pronounce any German words, so I apologize in advance. But basically, what that means, it's defined as the systemic mass murder of people with disabilities. So this is something that hits close to home for me, as I have a close relative who is pretty, I mean, not severely disabled, but definitely disabled to the point that this person is not going into the military if there's a draft. So I just, whenever I see stuff like this, I just kind of imagine this is what would potentially be happening to my close relative if we lived in that time period. So basically what it was a historic castle, and I'm reading from the inscription that was in front of the um, uh, dollhouse model they had of the building that they would take people to, but it was, quote, a historic castle located in Upper Austria. It functioned as a sanatorium from 1898 until 1940, when it became a site where tens of thousands of people with physical and mental disabilities deemed undesirable by the Nazis were systemically murdered. Basically, it was people, they would euthanize them. They would bring them into this facility, and they would euthanize people who were not deemed perfect. I'm trying to see, okay, the diseases, it would be people with chronic illnesses or disabilities, including afflictions such as depression and epilepsy, starting with children. Depression and epilepsy, the standard is fairly low. Like, I could have been thrown in there. I suffer from depression just like any other person on this planet. I don't know, is there any person on this planet who has not suffered from some form of depression? It's like, depending on the day, you could throw pretty much every person in there. But yeah, just, I can imagine that people with Asperger's or autism were probably being thrown in there. People who are just completely mentally impaired and can't function on their own. Those were the kinds of people that were being thrown in here and euthanized. And the reason why the further reason why this is a concern to me is because of what is happening in Iceland, I believe it is, where they've eradicated Down syndrome, because they kill Down syndrome babies before they're born, so they don't have to worry about Down syndrome. We cured it, guys. It's all good. So, like, that's what the Nazis could have said. Like, we cured epilepsy and depression because we just kill everybody that has it. There's no problem. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Yeah, it's all good. This is why I bring this up. It's something that is happening now in perhaps smaller quantities and less, it's garnered less media attention than it probably needs, but this happens. This is a thing that happens, and you need to be aware of it. And it's happened before, and it will happen again. And that's why I'm so adamant about having these kinds of museums and having historically literate citizens that know this is what happened before, this is what you need to look out for, because it will happen again. History repeats itself, and that's where that phrase comes from, because it's so darn true. Let's see. There were so many things that disturbed me in that museum. One of them, and I did not take a picture of it because it was really disturbing, was the Mengele experiments. Dr. Mengele was a monster of I don't even, he was just basically a monster. They called him the Angel of Light just because in case you didn't think he was creepy enough, he performed experiments on twins, on twin children. So he would get as many twins as he could find, and he would bring them in, and he would do experiments on them. Basically, he was testing to see how to perfect human life, and how what different diseases would do to different people, and so on and so forth. So he was injecting chemicals into children, and to see, basically using them as human experiments, and because he was a nice person, these people were very nice, that could have been one of the most disturbing displays there. Like it's very, very disturbing. The things that were done. There's actually BuzzFeed actually did a good piece of journalism by interviewing a former Holocaust survivor who was one of the twins that was experimented on. She actually can't. They haven't been able to identify what chemicals were pumped into her and her sister, who also survived. But they did later on, years and years later, they discovered that her sister's kidneys had not grown from beyond the size of what they were when she was 10 years old, when she was first experimented on. So they still have no idea what was injected into them, but they know what the result was. There was some sort of experimentation going on with the kidneys, clearly. And that twin with the kidney failure ended up dying. Later on, she did survive the camps, and then later into her adult years, she died after attempting to have children. So let's see, that was one of the most disturbing things, but quite frankly, the final most galling element from the Holocaust Museum was and this is where it gets graphic, guys, and you guys really don't need a disclaimer here, because if you're listening to my show, you're going to get some graphic stuff. So I apologize. But if you have a weak stomach, don't listen to it. But for the most disturbing part, of course, was the pictures of the stacks and stacks and stacks of dead bodies that were just piled up. And that is what the American soldiers walked into. There was, and my understanding is, in World War II, there was knowledge that there were concentration camps in Europe, but there was no real understanding. There was no real, like, photographic understanding of this is what is going on over there. They had no idea what they were walking into. And if you go to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., the way, and I'm going to spoil it for you guys, so don't listen if you want to be surprised when you go in the Holocaust Museum and get the full effect like I did, then don't listen to this anymore. But what happens in the D.C. Holocaust Museum is you get on an elevator and you go to the 4th floor, which is where you start, and you work your way down the museum. And on the way up the elevator, there's a video playing explaining what I just told you, that the Americans, they knew some of what was going on in Europe, but they had no understanding of the gravity of the situation, of what this is their mass murdering people and piling up bodies. And so then you walk out of the elevator and it's this wall-sized photograph, basically wallpaper, of the pictures of these bodies just stacked. And that is what the Americans walked into. So that is the most disturbing thing probably that you'll find. That and the pictures of the incinerators, which the Holocaust deniers are like, they were just trying to speed up the process, when prisoners would die and they didn't have any place to bury them. I'm like, yeah, incinerators, that's usually the best thing to do. It's cremation, it was respectful. You guys are morons. This was not respectful in any way. This was just plain and simple mass murder and mass destruction of a specific group of people. So I did take pictures of all of those, and I would highly recommend going to the Holocaust Museum in LA and in DC. The final bit of information on that is I did take a picture of one of the letters that the American soldier, one American soldier actually mailed to his parents, and apparently it was a letter that he wasn't necessarily supposed to send, but we're all very glad that he did. The letter goes like this: Dear Mom and Dad, this afternoon I had a rather shocking experience. We got word that there was a concentration camp about 10 miles from here, and they said that it was really something to see. So we loaded a couple of trucks and took for there. It's rather hard to describe something like that because you really have to see it to believe it. I know that I'll never forget it. It was a large camp, and someone said that it contained 15,000. They were all civilians: Poles, Russians, Serbians, Czechs, French, Italians, and every other country that they conquered. It was near Hitler's superhighway, which is what the prisoners worked on. The camp itself was hidden near the woods, about 3 miles from the nearest paved road, and contained a number of low wooden buildings where prisoners lived, and also a crematory in the center of the camp. But that isn't really what I want to describe. As we entered the camp, we saw about 30 prisoners sprawled on the ground, all shot through the head. They were lying in grotesque postures, the way that people do when they die suddenly. That was bad, but I saw something that was far more sickening. As I mentioned above, there was a crematory in the center of the camp with an oven equipped to burn 2 bodies at a time. In back of the crematory was a shed with 45 to 50 bodies stacked up on one side. They were all naked and stacked one on top of the other like a pile of wood, and all had evidently starved to death. They were nothing but skin-covered bones, and their thighs were no thicker than their ankles. Their hip bones stuck out 4 inches from either side of their stomachs, and none could have weighed more than 60 pounds. They didn't take up much more room than a dozen sacks of potatoes would have. As bad as that was, there was still something more horrible. In the woods about a mile from the camp were stacks of burned bodies. Alongside was a large pit with more bodies, and all around were other places with arms and legs sticking out of the ground where they didn't do a good job of burying. The whole thing was gruesome beyond words, and while I had heard and read about concentration camps, this one left me cold. There were still a few of the former prisoners walking around, and when I started to talk to one of them in German, several others came over, glad that someone could understand them, so they could all tell the real story. They said they were Poles and had been at this camp only 2 weeks, but had been in Germany for 4 years at various other camps. This camp contained a collection of people from all over Europe, but especially from Poland and Russia. It seems that the Germans had an especial desire to exterminate Poles and Russians. They worked all day long building the superhighway, sometimes marching 5 to 10 miles each way to work. They were fed about a liter of soup and a piece of black bread once a day, beaten continually, slept on the floor in the barracks without light or heat. I asked him all about the burned bodies in the woods, and he said that the day before the Americans arrived here, the German guards had ordered to exterminate everyone in the camp, and so they were marched out to the woods and killed in groups, with the second group disposing of the first, and the third group disposing of the second, and so on until they were all killed. But he said that the few who were still alive and the ones who lay around dead in the center of the camp had been out of on some work detail that day and had been brought back to the camp too late to be taken along. And in their haste to get away before the American troops came, the guards shot the ones that were left but didn't have the time to search the camp for stragglers. He named other concentration camps, large ones, where they killed 50,000 and more. It was all a part of the Nazi plan to exterminate millions of Europeans, but to use them as slave labor first and let them die of overwork and starvation. Even the ones I was talking to were so weak that they had to walk with canes or crutches. There was one lying on the ground in the sun, and he was too weak to get up by himself. I gave them a pack of cigarettes before, and I left, and they were overjoyed. That's the end of the story, and not a very nice one. The only thing that burns me up is that the Germans will never get what's coming to them. They are surrendering by the thousands and getting the treatment that we do. Probably the same guards that run the concentration camps are somewhere in America, in an American PW camp, waiting for a boat to go to the States. I know that the people back in the States have no idea what's happening over there, and maybe if you would care to have this letter printed in the newspapers, it would do some good. I don't know. I'm sending this blue envelope because I know that our own officers wouldn't approve of it and hope that it gets through. The Germans seem to be in their death throes, but I suppose you know that. The Nazi leaders are prepared to fight to the last man. They're ready to go to any lengths. I hope the Russians beat us to Berlin. That's all for now. We'll write more soon, and perhaps my next letter will be a little more cheerful. Love, Barry. Not your normal letter home from summer camp. This is why I'm such an advocate of people remembering and people knowing what happened in the past. And I hope that the gruesomeness of the letter is enough to shock people into realizing the importance of remembering, and especially in the light of the various attacks on different people for their differences or who they worship or whatever. It's just an important thing to remember that these attacks can ultimately culminate in what happened in Germany. It's something that can happen again. And this is not me being a fearmonger or anything. It's something that people need to remember and recognize. Otherwise, it will happen again. Because everybody says, "Oh no, we've arrived. You know, the Ocasio-Cortezes have arrived, and they are going to save us all with the Green New Deal and paint the skies with rainbows and unicorn farts." And then you read the reality of what is there. That kid couldn't have been more. I mean, he certainly was younger than Ocasio-Cortez. I'm certain of it. But that's the reality that people were dealing with almost 100 years ago, and people will deal with it again. And probably, I mean, they're dealing with it all over the world. It's just America that is rather inoculated to the grotesque treatment of other human beings because we have so many regulations preventing these things from happening. But that's basically the gist of my show for today. I know it's kind of heavy. I did want to end on a lighter note. We've got Avengers Endgame coming up on Thursday. I will be going to see it on Thursday night at 6 o'clock Pacific time. So everybody, if you don't want to see any spoilers, I will do my best not to. I'm pretty good about this. I'm pretty good about not spoiling it. I will tweet about it. I will say whether I liked it or whether I cried over it or whatever it is. I'm not going to tweet out spoilers or memes that will ruin your life. Certainly not within the first couple of days. But once you hit the weekend, you guys, if you haven't seen it by Saturday night, tough break. You're going to see stuff. You're going to get it spoiled. I'm sure that there will be one or two spoilers that I even see before then. I'm doing my best not to see them, but I will be watching the premiere tonight. So that'll be at 4:30 Pacific for everybody who wants to know. Oh, actually, this episode won't air until tomorrow. So you guys won't. Hopefully, you guys will see the premiere. But we'll see. Anyway, I keep forgetting that I record these in advance. I apologize, everyone. But my next episode, I'm hoping to have Jacob Airy to come on to discuss Avengers Endgame. Let's see. I was going to give a specific shout out to somebody else as well. You can follow at Become a Texan, Proud Texan on Twitter. Hopefully, I'll be having him on my show as well. I've got a couple of good. I'd like to have Ash from the Daily Wire come on also. I've got a very long list of guests. I think one of my top episodes for this recent show has actually been the episode where I had Donovan on, Donovan Fowler. So I might bring him back as well. Anyway, send me your messages and your thoughts and whatever you have to say, or your hate mail. I love the hate mail more than anything. So please send all of that to me at WarriorWoman91 on Twitter. And I will see you guys on the next episode.